Welcome.
Whoa!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to DnDTime Talks, where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. I am Pete.
And I'm your not robot co-host, Jeremy.
Really? I'm a robot? Are you messing
You
with me?
were for about 6 seconds there.
Oh, God, not tonight. Please don't do this to me, Discord, Lord of Chaos. I pray to you.
Pete, it's
I
not
don't-
Discord, it's you. Oh, wait, where the hell is my webcam's all off center? I don't know what
it might be
happened.
Discord. I don't know. I got a good. It says I got a good signal. Well,
Anyway, welcome to DnDTime Talks. We got a really exciting topic for y'all today. We're going to talk about that fat loot and other player rewards.
I said make money, make money.
Cash, dollar bills. Yeah, it should be a pretty exciting discussion. I will say before we dive into anything today, this is going to be one of those discussions, I think, where Pete and I maybe might have some differing opinions from place to place. But keep in mind, these are just everything we talk about tonight is how we feel, right? This is our opinions. This is how we like to do things. So, take it with a grain of salt if it's not what works for you and your players, but might get some real cool ideas listening and just saying,
Yeah, for sure. And anything that we anything that we espouse is not us saying that this is the correct way. And if we don't talk about the way that you do it, that doesn't mean that what you do is incorrect.
Yeah, and we also are. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Jeremy. That's pretty much it.
We also are not going to follow the optional guidelines in the Dungeon Master's Guide, probably at all. So
I don't think I've ever read. I don't think I've ever read those. By I don't think, I mean I know. Yeah, I've never dived into that, so I'll just be talking out of my own experiences, I guess.
Pete's a talky boy. But yeah, anyway,
I'm kind of a talk boy.
If you want to join into the conversation, just do so in the chittle chat. Oh God, I'm not going to say that literally ever again. Say that in the chat, and we'll read what you have to say and kind of talk about it too. And yeah, if you have a topic you want us to talk about in the future, let us know on Discord or on Twitter. We're always looking for new, interesting ideas. I mean, there's really no shortage. Pete and I could just sit here and just abstractly talk about Dungeons and Dragons for hours on end. But
that's why we started the show, is because we just do that. We did that most nights anyway, so.
But yeah, if there's something you want to see, just let us know.
Want to dive right in?
Yeah, let's dive right in. Pete, let's start us off. Why?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
What are we talking about is we're talking about player rewards. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about loot. This is a very expansive topic with some of the subtopics that we're going to be talking about. For example, like gold and magic items. Each of those could be an entire episode of DnDTime Talks. But for today, we're going to be kind of doing an overarching all kind of things that could be considered part of player rewards and just talking about, kind of getting loot and experienced items is a lot of what keeps players kind of, at least in the short term, invested in your game, even more than the story, is just the excitement of finding things. Adventure. It's what adventure in kind of a classical sense is really about. And you think of things like gold and treasure and magic items, but that's not the only kind of rewards that we're going to be talking about, because there are a lot of other great ways to reward players via things that we give them in role playing, different boons granted to them by powerful beings, just inspiration, the mechanic that's already in 5th edition, or experience, just levels and new abilities as they level up. So there's all kinds of different stuff that we're going to be going over as we kind of move through today's discussion.
Yeah, and we think this is a really important discussion because a lot of dungeon masters really have a hard time finding that balance when they're, especially when they're first starting a campaign, between their players being totally broke and feeling like they get nothing for completing adventures, and getting flooded with money, and then your campaign becoming irreparably flooded with gold and you lose control of things. So basically, we're going to talk a lot about different kinds of rewards in ways of keeping it sweet, so the players keep feeling like they're getting something cool and exciting and new without the whole game coming out of your control.
Finding a way to kind of toe that razor's edge, so to speak.
Yeah. So as a result, our discussion is going to be focused a lot about the dungeon master. But as a player,
there's always something.
It can never hurt to understand where your dungeon master is coming from. If they're not giving you cool loot, it's probably because there's something really cool to give you soon.
Or maybe they just mean and don't like you.
So yeah, like we were saying, finding a balance. This is kind of our first real talking point. You got to find a very, very particular balance, especially with your players and your world, as to what is not enough and what is too much in terms of rewarding your players. You don't want every little thing they do to have like the whole town swooning over them. It's like, you saved my cat from a tree. The heroes!
All hail!
Yeah, otherwise, and maybe that'd be funny, right? You save a cat from a tree and everyone in town knows about it the next day. You go and defeat the dragon that was plotting to destroy the town and no one ever cares. Maybe that's like a decision you're making as a DM, which is just funky, but whatever. But anyway, you wanna find that balance. It's kind of a needle's edge there, where if you go too far overboard, the whole thing stops making sense.
And so yeah, the kind of way you do that as a DM, that's going to be kind of one of the other major takeaways from this discussion, is that you really need to think before you put things into your game. Think about why you are giving the players this. Think about what its implications are going to be for the long term in your campaign. For example, if you give your level 1 adventurer your +5 sweet sword of god slaying that you homebrewed after they complete their first, fight some goblins adventure, you need to think about what that's going to do to their expectations about what rewards are going to be like in this game, and how that's going to affect the balance of future monsters that you're going to be, stacking them up against. So that's just something, anytime you're going to put something new, and keep that in mind as we start kind of going over the different types of rewards that you can give people, because we're going to be touching on these two kind of topics as we go over each individual kind of piece. So let's start with the most kind of classical Dungeons and Dragons reward, the number one. You got to get gold, right, Jeremy? Got to get gold.
Yeah, it's all about that cash money, dollar bills. Gold, as we're calling it right now, really refers to a plethora of different currencies in Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
You know what currencies are if you're watching this video. I hope. Unless you're a strange forest person who's broken into someone's home and is watching DnDTime.
Oh, you're referring to usually you'll have like acorns or something like that you can use as a touchstone.
Exactly. So basically, gold's a really interesting thing here. Because at the start of the game, especially when you're level 1, assuming you start at level 1, and you roll up your character and you look at your starting gold and you're like, I have 15 gold. Or if you're like, I think it's a hermit, it's like, I've got 5 gold.
I got 5 big gold pieces.
Shit. Or if you roll for gold and you have to buy your equipment, then you have no equipment and very little gold. So at the beginning of the game, oftentimes players struggle to get even basic mundane items. Like rations are brutal for starting players. Basic armor can be difficult. Weapons, if they lose them.
Armor and weapons are brutal at level 1s.
Healing potions are a thing of dreams.
Yeah, I was going to say, healing potions are like your distant, maybe someday when I'm a real adventure, I can afford to drop 50 gold on a consumable.
Yeah, like Lance was saying in chat, good berries, the level 1 player's healing potion.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, these kind of things, or even
Plunder Loot's talking about Electrum. Get out of here, Plunder Loot. I don't want to hear about your Electrum pieces.
Well, and other things, especially early on in the game, right? This is where you make a decision and you get a really quick understanding of how your players feel about it as a dungeon master. So with this penny pinching where they need to save every little bit and making a little bit of money because they play a song at the tavern and they're the bard, and so they can stay there the night for free. If you're doing that and they're counting their ammunition, they're counting their arrows and they're enjoying that, then you got to keep that in mind, that you want to retain as much of that feeling of gold is rare and valuable because it's what your players like. If they don't like it, then you can start really, you don't have to worry as much as you go further on about making some of that, what do you call it? Gritty realism go away.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and
sure. There's sort of a fun point, and I think in particularly for low level characters, like if you're really starting at level 1, I think there's a lot of fun in having that period of time where the players don't have any money, so that when they finally do make that first, like they go on that first quest and they roll up and the 4 players have like 200 gold to split between them. They've all taken away 50 gold, and all of a sudden there's just all of these options that are there before them. Like they can go to the tavern and celebrate, because realistically a ale is like a silver piece, so 1 gold pays for all of their drinks for the night. And they can buy that like extra dagger that they've been wanting, and they just feel rich, because most things in a D&D setting, once you've like done one adventure pays for like most of the mundane things that you're going to want on the day to day, because they're not that expensive.
Well, it can.
Yes. I mean, all the, it depends on the individual nature of the adventure and, what rules you're using for buying things. But adventurers make a lot more money than, professional workers in a town for the most part. Like, the pay goes up quick.
And an important thing to consider, right, is in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, gold is this thing that you're encouraged in the Dungeon Master's Guide and just through popular culture and the stigma in the game to give to your players. But there's not a lot in 5e to spend gold on. So it's really important as you go on to come to some conclusions early about what you want players to be able to use that gold for, because like the purpose of gold is to buy stuff with it, and if there's nothing to buy, it kind of becomes obsolete, and like it's just this thing that you hoard. You basically a rainy day. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say your adventurers just become ancient dragons that are amassing this huge pile of gold coins that are all just covered in dust. And so, as we go through the different rewards, I was going to say,
what's the first, like, most obvious thing that people can buy with gold?
The first and most obvious thing that people can buy with gold, well, I guess we're going to say magic items are, the quintessential Dungeons and Dragons reward. You go into your ancient dungeon and you find your cool glowing sword. Every single player who plays D&D, at some point, if you have any frame of reference for what Dungeons and Dragons is, you want to someday pick up like a cool like +1 sword or staff that shoots fireballs or some kind of magic thing, because that's just kind of what the history and like the culture of D&D is. You find cool magic items that help you adventure better. It's a classic.
Yeah, and there are 2 main things to really think about when you're giving out magic items to Dungeon Master, whether they be available to purchase by the players or just given as a reward at the end of the adventure. Maybe they find it or they're given it by whoever hired them or what have you. And the first thing to consider is your power level. How strong do you want your item to be? And once again, this is going to vary immensely depending on the group that you play with. As like a rough guideline, you could give an uncommon magic item to players of levels 1 through 5, a rare item to levels 6 through 10, very rare 11 through 15, and legendary above. But even then, that is a very rough guideline.
Yeah, that is imperfect for sure.
No 2 items are necessarily the same or even comparable. The rarity sometimes does not actually correlate to how powerful they are, and so that's something to really consider.
And the rarity could even like confuse you and make you not realize how good something that you're giving out is, or vice versa.
A great example of that is it's a rare item. It's a sword. It's called the Flame Tongue Sword, which just means all of your attacks do 2d6 extra fire damage, which is absurd in the hands of like a fighter with multi-attack. And something like that. I'm sure there's a more optimal thing than just a fighter with multi-attack. But the point remains the same, that that's a rare item. According to what we just said, you could give that to your characters as early as level 6, and that would pretty much double your fighter's damage. So it's really important to think about how that's going to impact. Like Lance was saying in chat too, a Broom of Flying is an uncommon magic item. Giving your characters access to limitless flight early on, that's something really important to consider.
You don't really, and I think a lot of like newer GMs don't consider what the ramifications of that mean, because now your players have this kind of jackknife that can be fit into any situation in which the challenge of their situation is to avoid some kind of like difficult terrain, or to, climb a treacherous cliff, or to go over, kind of a busted rope bridge. Now they just have this, tool that will get them out of any situation like that, and they will never want to give it up ever.
Yeah, I mean, something great to consider, right? Whether you're talking about a +1 dagger or that uncommon broom, giving that to a level 1 character is a huge deal. +1 to damage and to hit at level 1 is massive. The ability to fly at level 1 is massive. Giving it to that same player at level 15, it's not like negligible, but it's a lot less impactful. So the same item, no matter how good it is, depends on what level the characters are really at.
Another thing to think about, some items, their power level, it's not that they're necessarily strong, but the way they work makes them feel like a gift for everybody. So for example, when you put in that +1 dagger, you're kind of thinking, oh, well, the party will end up giving this to the rogue because that's his main weapon, and now I'm going to be kind of buffing that character and giving that particular character a new toy and a new reward to work with. And that's on top of everything we talked about, that's another thing to consider, is who the item is going to kind of go to, and keeping out kind of an even spread among your players, and making everyone kind of feel useful evenly. And great items for that are things like the quintessential item, the Bag of Holding, which for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, it is a bag that essentially has an interior that's significantly larger than the side of the bag. You can hold up to like 500 pounds of stuff in a bag that weighs about 10 pounds. So it's a classic D&D item, but that's not just a buff for the person who finds it. That's something that everyone in the party will benefit from, because everyone will just start putting all their stuff in the Bag of Holding. So that's a reward. That magic item is a reward for everyone, not just the person who finds it.
And yeah, I mean, another thing to consider, especially when you're talking about weapons that make your character strictly better, that's a term I'm going to use now, and it'll probably come up a few more times in this discussion. There are magic items like the Bag of Holding that are not strictly better. Like, you get a Bag of Holding and the party can do a little bit more with it, but it doesn't make you more overpowered, or replacing an existing magic item with one that does something different. But when you give a character an optimal item, something that is perfect on them, like you say you have your rogue and you give him his rapier, which does a d8 of damage, the best damage die a rogue can get. You give them their +1 to hit, or +2 to hit, or their flame tongue. They have just become substantially stronger. Whereas if you had given them something maybe less optimal, like a dagger, they're less strong, but they still feel really cool. Another great example is giving a magic great club to a fighter. A great club is not a good weapon. It's a very bad weapon. But if it's magic, now it gives it some cool extra finesse, and the player will still use it. They might have not actually gotten any more powerful from getting this magic item, but they will feel a lot more powerful. I guess if they're fighting ghosts, they'll be more powerful.
Yeah, and now they have kind of a new option, and it also gives you room to, when you want to reward them again, you've left yourself space to continue to give them new items that will upgrade even upon that club. You kind of set, a progressive scale. Mr. Plunderloot said in chat, give the paladin a Holy Avenger. Every paladin's dream is to someday hold the Holy Avenger. And that brings you another question is, you can put items in your game that you really intend for one player. You can put in that Holy Avenger because there's a paladin and that they will make incredible use of it. but also, if you do that a little bit too much, I think that the items, it starts to feel like it's almost breaking reality. Like, why is everything that we find so perfect for us as a party? So it's also a good idea to maybe put in an item that no one in the party actually has any use for. Maybe they find, maybe they're a party of wizards and they find that Holy Avenger and it's just, well, what the hell are we going to do with this? And now they have, almost a quest to either find someone to buy it or to find a paladin who's willing to trade for it, or, it makes the world feel a little bit more alive and not like it was specifically made for the players, even though it probably was.
Yeah, and keeping on this Holy Avenger train, maybe you have an item, maybe you want to give that paladin a Holy Avenger, but they're level 1 and it's like, there's no way I can give them Holy Avenger level 1. Maybe consider giving them a blessed short sword or a blessed long sword or whatever. And then as they level up, maybe new abilities within the item unlock. And this is especially helpful if it's an item that like the players really care about. So in the paladin example with the Holy Avenger, maybe the lord ruler guy of his knightly order bestows him with this this blessed long sword at the swearing of, I say his, of the swearing of their oath at level 3. And it's like, wow, what does it do? Well, it's just a magic sword for now. And you use that word for now. You say that as a dungeon master, and they look at you and like, what do you mean for now? It's like, well, it's just a magic sword.
Yeah, it's just a magic sword.
And you just you use the word for now, and they're like, well, what does that mean? And then later on, when they are in desperate need for help, it magically unlocks and gets this cool new ability where like it bursts into flames or whatever, or the Holy Avenger aura comes or something. You can do a lot of neat stuff with it. And
that's as good, or like, honestly, in a lot of cases, even cooler than finding a magic item. Yeah. Like finding that thing that's perfect for you is not the same as like all of a sudden realizing that what you already had is what you wanted it to be. It's, I've had stuff like that happen to me in games. I'm sure you have too, Jared. It's extremely satisfying. And nothing will get a player more excited than all of a sudden finding out that something cool is even cooler than they thought it was.
I mean, I know we want to move on to the next point here, but a great example of this is if you ever watched or listened to The Adventure Zone, their first arc. One of the characters had a magical, basically a staff that after defeating an enemy with a magical item would consume their magical item and become more powerful. So it literally was a magic umbrella that functioned as a staff that just ate magic stuff and became more powerful. And that's a really cool way of saying like, yeah, dude, I'm still going to drop magic items for you. And there's a rationale as to why your thing is becoming more powerful. And now you have you can have your own personal quest to go find more magic stuff for your thing to consume. And like something like that gives the characters a ton of like motivation to go and do stuff and to like really engage with their item.
Getting cool stuff is gotta be like the number one thing that players will do, no matter how cool your story is. If you are like, if you tell them that the final boss that they've been looking for is down one road, but there's a sweet magic sword that they can pick up down the other one, they ain't gonna go fight that boss.
Well, and Bionic Sheba, of course, you don't need infinitely scaling items. Maybe they're temporary boosts, or maybe there are like very clear breakpoints.
It might be a final cap.
Maybe as a dungeon master, you heavily imply it's becoming more powerful, but really it's just going to happen as they level up. But they don't feel like that because the illusion, which is Dungeons and Dragons,
I feel like that's a whole episode. Is the illusion of being a dungeon? Yeah.
Anywho. So forget about that. We talked a lot about like the core, like a magic item, one magic item, but that's not important. We're talking about lots of magic items.
Oh yeah, you got to make it rain.
How often should you give out magic items?
That's entirely depends, as everything does. But there's kind of a few different schools of thought. And a lot of it also has to do with your world. So maybe you're in a high magic world, and that's the kind of game that you want to play, where, people walking down the streets, people in their homes have self-sweeping brooms that clean their floors for them. And in that kind of world, maybe magic items pop up all the time. They're almost mundane. You can go into a store and buy one without difficulty. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe you're playing in kind of like an Arthurian, very kind of low fantasy where any magic item that you encounter is going to be like squirreled away piece of like item of legend that people never heard about. Like a +1 sword is unheard of. No one holds a blade that possesses this kind of magic. And so then magic items you will not see very much. It's up to you as a dungeon master to think about what kind of world you're playing, how much makes sense, and what your players find fun.
And just because you're playing in a low magic world does not mean you give your players fewer rewards. It just means the rewards are less magical in nature. That's super important. That is one of the biggest tripping points I tend to see. Yeah, one thing that is super important as you're playing, just be consistent with it. Like, if you're giving people tons of items, levels like 1 through 4, and then realize you've given them too much and stop giving them anything levels 4 through 7, they're not going to be happy. But no one's ever going to be unhappy with suddenly getting more things. So when in doubt, start off slow. And if it feels like, maybe they're too weak or they're not getting enough stuff or they're like wondering why they're not finding stuff, then, figure that out. And before we...
Maddox Shiva says, somebody steals all your magic items in the night.
That is the worst.
Oh, that feels so bad as a player when that happens.
Yeah, don't do that if you can help it. Unless it's like super important for the narrative, try not to do that.
Or, you intend to give them back like immediately.
Yeah, right. Another great thing you can totally do is consumables. Things like healing potions or spell scrolls are two very common consumables in the Dungeon Master's Guide. There are a few others that are also very good, or not very good that exist. But yeah, basically consumables are a great way of giving players temporary power if you're going to give them. Give them a lot. I have seen so many parties go, like I've played in a party that we had the loot hoarder in the party. We went through levels, like, I think I joined in at level 7. We ended at level 20. And the list of consumables that we had but had not used stretched through like 3 pages of Word document. Like, use your consumables if you have them, players. And Dungeon Masters give consumables frequently enough that players feel like they can use them. Because, damn.
Consumables are like a really great opportunity to give your players like really out there stuff that's like a lot more powerful than they should probably be receiving. Like if you give a party that's like around level 5 like a level 9 spell scroll, all of a sudden they have this single use tool that could absolutely like define a moment, and it lets them be cool one time without having to worry about like what the long-term ramifications of that are for your game. Albeit, if it's a wish, then there's probably gonna be some long-term ramifications for your game. But like, say it's but say it's like a gate spell, so they all of a sudden can one time go to another plane or summon a being that they want to contact from another plane. Like that's a really huge deal. If it's a what's another good one? We talked about this, Jeremy, with the meteor. Mm-hmm. You have this one-time nuke where you can just absolutely, annihilate an area or like an enemy base, and that's just going to feel really cool for players.
And yeah, it's funny. Bionic Shiva saying in chat, and as a dungeon master, you forget about it till 10 levels later when they wipe out everything that you had planned. And you know what? They're gonna feel so fucking good about it that it's gonna be worth it.
Absolutely.
You might be totally, befuddled, but yeah. Lots of consumables is good. But yeah, I mean, there's more to D&D than just gold and consumables. You need some...
Is there?
Yeah, you need some variety. There are some other awesome rewards that you can give to players. I say give. That players can earn through completing their adventures and doing quests. That can help to make the game feel fresh and keep everything exciting. So here are a couple alternative rewards. The first one is boons. So a boon is basically a magical blessing or a magical empowerment that is directly it's to the character. And a great example would be like an ancient dragon breathing fire upon your sword to make it a flame-tongued sword for a time. Or for example, I'm thinking dragons because that's the easiest thing, but maybe a powerful dryad of my leaky can bless you with some sort of magical healing to find the path, or not magical healing, magical guidance to find the path through the Feywild, where now you can cast a spell, find the path a certain number of times, and then it's gone.
And boons feel good for like a couple of reasons. One, a boon, like your items, you've been collecting all these like powerful items that do stuff. A lot of them probably have attunement slots. A boon is something that's just now inherent to your player. It's just your character is now better. Or if I guess in the case of the magic sword, it's just kind of a temporary buff that you were talking about before. But it's just an extra effect that's going to be inherent to them that they just have. Like, they didn't feel like they had to give anything up to add it to their repertoire. They're just, a little bit better now. And as Jeremy said, in that scenario where they have to, he breathes the flame tongue onto their blades for a certain time, this ancient dragon, now the players also have a reason for you as a storyteller to go back to this ancient dragon because they want to get that cool fire buff back. And maybe there's a whole nother, you get to reintroduce this character and maybe as a new quest for them to get more cool stuff, as is the ancient cycle of D&D.
Yeah, and I mean, that's basically the gist of boons. There are a whole list of boons that are suggested in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide. They vary absolutely astronomically in power. They're intended to be like after level 20, you can give your players this kind of stuff, but you can pare a lot of those down and use them whenever. I mean, they are simple as like, when you miss an attack, you can reroll the attack once per day, which is like, cool. Great. Yeah. That just feels cool. I have this blessing of accuracy from my god of the hunt, or something along those lines.
Stuff that you get to use like that is always really fun. If it's like once a day, you get to decide when it happens and it's less passive. It feels more impactful when it does because it's constantly kind of reminding the player that they have it by them having to actively use it.
Yeah, and boons, like we said, can be temporary. They could be something that lasts a certain number of days. Like you'd say, oh, it lasts for 10 days in game. Or it can be in a thing that you use a certain number of times, like the charms. There are a bunch of charms that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide that you can look up. Like a charm of restoration. It has 6 charges, like a magic item, and you can use those charges to cast greater or lesser restoration. When the charges are gone, the blessing is gone. Done. Something like that's a really great example where it's basically a consumable, but it's a blessed thing or a magical gift. Yeah, but just make sure your players understand when you're going to give them something temporary. The last thing that you want is that player being super stoked about their flame tongue sword, and then you're counting time as the dungeon master's like, all right, well, you've traveled for 2 weeks. You went back to Waterdeep to buy some gear instead of going to confront the ice.
Yeah, and then
so your flame tongue sword's gone now. It's like, shh, what? It's important you're very clear about that kind of stuff because sometimes players don't get it.
I know you just went on a stretch, but do you want to do incidental rewards, Jeremy? I know you were excited about this one.
I really love incidental rewards. That's not like an actual term for anything. So let me explain what the hell I mean. Almost put a dollar in the swear jar there. Incidental rewards are things that just kind of happen. And you're thinking like what? So let's say you're fighting a gelatinous cube and you're a rogue and you're just like, you're throwing all your daggers into the cube. You're backed into the corner. All of your allies are downed. And this is a true story. The last dagger. And it dies, and you're like, yeah! And you go to collect your daggers, and you bring up your allies, and in this desperate, dramatic moment, you find that your daggers aren't corroded like you figured they would be. They're, in fact, blessed with acidic damage by this. They just do +1 acid damage on hit, which is just an awesome way to make this dramatic moment into like a lasting thing, so that later in the campaign, a great example from a campaign I ran to completion, which I'm very proud of. Early in the campaign, they were traveling along a cliff edge, and as they came around the corner, they came face to face with this giant ogre that was just also like trying to scoot along the cliff edge. And the ogre wrecked them. He messed them up, but they killed him. Just barely, at great expense. And one of the things that killed the ogre, they found a sword, a magic sword, in his belly button because he had gotten stabbed. And they're like, the hell is this? They killed the ogre and found the magic sword. Great. And that campaign ended with the last phrase, like, of combat being, I found this sword in an ogre's belly button. And it was just fantastic. It was this very dramatic moment with this hilarious, fun kind of niche to it. So these items can be really cool for players. Another great example, they have a harrowing defeat and flee an ancient white dragon that they're fighting. And they find that their armor, after being hit by like 4 breath weapons, has been magically imbued with some of the magic and temporarily has temporary resistance to cold damage.
Yeah, all kinds of little things.
Yeah, Farfel was in this campaign, so he knows this ogre. Great expense. But yeah, these are kind of rewards that you can use to help take these epic moments or goofy fun moments and make them lasting parts of your campaign. And I think that they're really important and heavily underutilized, or dramatically underutilized.
And like that's the thing is because when you have that, like, say that dagger that deals a little bit of extra acid damage, every time you swing that dagger and deal that acid damage, you'll think about the dramatic moment in which you had originally earned it, and it remind you, and it'll it feels more special. It ties the reward to the actual action that gave it to you, which you know, that's just good DMing right there.
It helps to build this, like, the story that you're and the story that the players are making. Also, so players never see it coming, and surprises are great. The item you didn't think you were going to get that you now just have is awesome. So Pete, absolutely. I just talked for like 10 minutes. Talk about our RP rewards.
I wanted to talk. Mr. Plunderloot was saying boons from NPCs are something to consider. More or less favors owed to the party. And this is a great example of a good RP reward. And this is on the subject of things that we could take a whole session for. I think we could spend an entire talks on just how to reward players with RP. But we will touch on some kind of ideas here.
For those not aware, RP is short for role-playing.
Indeed. So these can take a huge, wide array of forms when we say RP rewards, but here are a few kind of, you know, examples. Maybe you have completed a very long series of adventures for king, and upon their return to the kingdom, having done whatever task that he had set them out for, he knights the heroes, granting them privileges within his kingdom. They have title, and now they have earned the respect of this kingdom, and that can be really satisfying for players. It feels like their adventures, they have earned, you know, they've gained respect. They've become heroes. They've done the thing that they set out to do in the first place, which is, as players, you want to be the hero of the story. That's kind of why you play Dungeons and Dragons. So this kind of solidifies that. And then, as a quick side note before I go into a few more, as a dungeon master, when you present a player with this kind of reward, make sure that you actually use it. Make sure that it has significance. You want, when your players, say, become knights, you want the people of that kingdom to start addressing them as sir. You want them to feel like the title that they have matters, or lady, indeed. I thought sir was just a general term for knights. Is there a...
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
I thought that was a gender neutral. Anyway, either way, or whatever title that they have, whatever title that they have gained.
Lady.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe there's a town crier, right? That's a great thing to do in RP rewards. Just a subtle mention that the town crier is calling out your recent victory, and is like, to the town. That's all you have to do. Little kids running around with little printed paper, crying out, "Heroes defeat dragons, Sir blah 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 does blah blah blah." And of course, why'd you name your character Sir blah blah blah? But the point remains the same, that like it's just one thing that you just mentioned, and it helps to really make people feel like, oh, that's why everyone knows me now.
On a smaller scale, maybe for your kind of the first adventure, they go into a town and the people in that town don't really trust the heroes, and they don't want to kind of put the sake of the fate of their town in these people's hands, but the heroes go out and do it anyway, and they come back, and now the people who distrusted them now like them because they helped. And just that kind of shift in attitude from an RP perspective can just be really gratifying for players. Let's talk some other kind of like more tangible RP rewards. There is it's pretty good, Derek. There are a lot of kind of more, like I said, tangible things you can give players. Maybe you give players the same kind of king that you saved before that doesn't knight them, but he gives them a home within the kingdom, some kind of base or a keep or a castle, or some other miscellaneous thing that they now can live in. They can collect mementos from their journeys and leave them there. They can hire, they can hire people to work in and defend their keep. They can hire a butler to wait on them while they're there. And on the subject of, real estate and keeps and kingdoms, that's a great thing to have players spend money on if they're piling up too much money. Buying territory. Maybe they open up a tavern that they host, and they tell all the tales of their great adventures at this tavern, and they can always come back and they have the fun of buying free drinks there, and all the patrons hope to run into them someday when they arrive.
Yeah. And of course, just simply the gratitude of the townspeople is a reward in its own right that, players will appreciate. Actually, it's funny, we got a great comment in chat from Bionic Sheba. Give them scars for failing. Here's your reward for failure. It's funny you mentioned that, because sometimes when you're playing a game and you're playing with a group that knows what they're doing, right? I'm sorry, not knows what they're doing, has a lot of experience role-playing is what I really meant to say there. And they, a lot of the times, will offer up suggestions to you as a DM when you're playing the game. So like a great example in a campaign I recently ran is at a very, very early level. These players were confronted with a powerful mage who knew the lightning bolt spell, and they were blasted by it. And the fighter survived with like 4 hit points from it. And one of the things that player offered up was like, oh yeah, I'm terribly scarred by this lightning. And that was really cool. And that's a situation where I made the mistake of thinking like, oh, he wants that cured, and having like, fairly soon after some magical effect cure him of that. Where that's not what he wanted. What he wanted was sick lightning scars, because he survived this attack that by all rights should have killed him. And that's just a really important thing to know. If your players offer up specific injuries to their characters, maybe that's like something they want for the aesthetic of their character, right? Maybe that's actually like a reward in its own right, even though it seems like a bad thing. Just wanted to,
and that takes time.
Real quick.
That takes time to learn to like read your players and to get to know, what they want out of the game and their expectations, and stuff like that's okay to like. You can just explicitly ask your player something like that. Like if they say that they have this scar, you can just be like, yeah, what does your player think of this? Does he like these scars because, they show this trouble thing, or would he rather have them gone? You can just ask your player what the answer to that is, and then you as a DM know.
Yeah, precisely. And talking about players wanting to play their characters in such a way and being invested in their character, inspiration is a mechanic in 5th edition which is intended to reward players for role-playing their characters. What inspiration is you can only have 1 at a time as a character. You can have a die of inspiration. And when you have that, at any point when you roll an ability check, an attack roll, or a saving throw, basically any d20 roll, you can choose to spend your inspiration to roll a second one, basically gaining advantage. It's a very powerful ability. It feels good, but a word of caution. First of all, I recommend using inspiration, especially if you have players who are a little more, a little less outgoing, maybe a little more in their shell. But my warning here is reward inspiration not for good role play. Reward inspiration for going outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't matter if you're playing with like the best role player in the world and they do a great job every time. If they're not going above and beyond and going outside their comfort zone, don't just give that player inspiration. I found myself struggling to kind of fairly dole out inspiration at times. And sometimes if like everyone seems to have a good time and there was a really good scene that goes on, at the end of it, just be like, yeah, that was great. All of you guys get a point of inspiration. That was really fun to watch and be a part of. You know, don't be afraid to tell your players like, that was really entertaining. Good work.
And that's the cool thing about inspiration is that when everything else that we've talked about today is you're rewarding their characters for playing the game. Inspiration is you're rewarding the player for playing the game. You're saying that what you're doing is cool and I support that. I want you to keep doing this. I want you to keep engaging in the way that you have been. You personally, the player, are doing a good job. And nothing else really does that, which is a cool kind of a cool thing about inspiration. It's great for, getting newer players out of their shells and use it. I think it's an underutilized. Yes, indeed.
Even veteran
I think
players.
It's an underutilized tool for sure.
Absolutely. Another great, actually, the exact opposite, right, is experience. If you're playing in a game where characters level up through XP, don't forget to give them their XP. A great kind of idea, what I would like to do is I will count their tokens. I'll take, once they've killed a creature, whether I'm using a map on a table or a digital map on Roll20, I will put the tokens somewhere where I can see everything they fought and then count that up during like a long rest and reward it to them at the end of a long rest. It's a very good opportunity. And then you don't have to worry about next time because you've already just rewarded them. I don't wait until the end of an adventure to give them their XP. And yeah, I mean, XP is just pretty good. Just giving them when they want it. Be reasonable with it. Make sure. Yeah.
As I say, if you know they're going to level up, you probably don't have to worry about as many other rewards because, like, that's another thing is we were talking about variety. You got to keep them on their toes. Like, one day they level up, one day they get a cool pile of gold, one day they get an item, one day they get a boon. Just always kind of moving it around. You get that. It's like it's like working out. You gotta mix up the muscles. You got a muscle confusion, as you call it. Same thing with Dungeons and Dragons. Working out and Dungeons and Dragons are the same thing, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that's all we really need to say about XP. XP is the one kind of rote mechanical aspect to this. I've tried giving out XP for good role-playing situations. I've tried giving out XP simply for quests, quest completion rather than just monsters fought. And by the way, averting a monster fight counts. You get XP for that. You don't have to kill everything to get XP. You may not get as much XP. You might get like half or 2/3. But keep in mind, like, just because someone cleverly subverts your fight, and I mean cleverly, not like cheeses the fight, that they don't get XP. The next thing we're going to mention is feats, which this is something that I think Pete and I completely disagree on. Feats are a mechanic that's in the game. It exists as an optional rule, and you can reward players with feats for spending a lot of time doing a particular thing.
So I take it by this, do not believe in this as a player reward.
For me personally, I would rather homebrew cool feat-like things for my players than use a given list. But
I agree.
There are some really cool feats on the list. Pete, you have a great example here.
Yeah, let's let me give an example. Let's say that you have a player that in one of their first sessions of the game, they tame a wild horse, which is, for the record, another great reward. Finding things like, horses and pets, those are another way to reward players. And then they ride that horse into battle for dozens of sessions after. They just love this horse, and they spend so much time doing it. It's not something that they built their character to do, but they just do it enough that you decide that you want to reward them with, in the player's handbook, the mounted combatant feat, which makes them basically better a better fighter while on a horse, or on any kind of mount. This is potentially a really cool reward for that player. It's something that they didn't expect that they were going to get, and now all of a sudden they have this whole new boon that fits perfectly for what they already have been doing as a character. And as Jeremy pointed out, there's a lot of feats in the player's handbook that I don't think are appropriate for that. Feats that are very powerful mechanically, such as, say, your sharpshooter or great weapon master. That's probably not something you want to give a player for free, because it would, be a little bit of an effect on game balance. But you can find cool ways to just apply new abilities to your characters based on the way that they play, and the unique things that they do.
Yeah, the one warning I would say about something like this, and this is a player by player, group by group kind of warning, which also would depend heavily on the tone of your game. But keep in mind that if players think that they're going to get a reward for doing something, they're going to do it. So in the case of the horse, right? If the player's riding around this horse that they can't control because they have a very low wisdom and they can't animal handle, and the horse is just running all over the place, and that player is useless in combat, they're not going to be as effective, and the party's going to take a serious hit because that player really wants this reward at the end. I had a campaign I ran recently where I made the mistake of telling a player that, you want to try and wield a two-handed weapon not a two-handed weapon. You want to try and wield this, it was a two-handed weapon. You want to try and wield this two-handed weapon in one hand. Okay, sure. I guess if you do it enough, maybe whatever. But while you do it, I'm not going to give you your proficiency bonus and stuff because you're not proficient with that. Oh my God! What should have been just a fairly straightforward dungeon crawl became the fight of their lives. They were just on the brink of death at every turn because this player refused to not do that, to not dual wield two-handed weapons at disadvantage with no proficiency bonus, so that they would get this reward later. So keep in mind
that's a little wonky,
and just. Yeah, don't let the allure of rewards destroy the verisimilitude of the game. There's no reason that any sane person is going to run around using a weapon they're not proficient with when they're on the brink of death in this desperate fight because they want to get proficiency with it for later. That just doesn't make sense. So make sure that it...
Yeah, agreed.
Players will do crazy things for rewards.
Here's another one that I want to talk about. Let's talk about quests. Getting a new quest can be a reward in of itself. Maybe at the end of their quest, they find a treasure map, which a treasure map is a unique kind of quest trigger because it implies that when they go to the place that's on the treasure map, they will find treasure. Or maybe they find some kind of cryptic riddle that promises loot in the future. Just like a promise of future reward is almost as good as a reward in some places. Years of training, not this dungeon, says Bionic Shiva.
Yeah, really?
Pretty good. And when you give something I've never as a player, actually I was going to say I've never as a player not followed a treasure. I've actually never gotten a treasure map as a player. I know if I ever encountered a treasure map as a player that I would be so excited to follow that map and do literally anything that it said. And it wouldn't matter if that was the only thing I found. There's just something very alluring about a quest that has that kind of physical aspect to it. Maybe you find a letter that tells them of, kind of a place that they used to go to that was this kind of paradise that they could then track down and find. There are all kinds of ways to find these physical remnants of quests, and then it's just another cool way to reward players that's a little bit outside of the normal box from what you'd expect.
Yep. And I think the last thing we're really going to talk about briefly is story and backstory rewards. But before we do that, there's one thing that we kind of missed talking about earlier that I want to talk about now. This is kind of going back to the gold and magic items. So you fought your boss, right? You've had a harrowing battle against the ancient white dragon, and you've slain him after what was like an hour and a half long, just grinding combat session. And it did involve Fomorian Farfel. But anyway, you defeat this dragon, and one of the players is unconscious, the rest of the players are badly wounded, and you see the big pile of treasure. And you have that player who runs over and says, "Oh, I go and I go look at the treasure." And you say, "Oh, okay." And everyone else is trying to like, "Oh, I'm going to heal this ally who's down." And another player's like, "Oh, can you describe like the situation that we see now?" And so players are asking for different things, but one player's got one track line: I'm getting the loot. He goes over, he or she, they go over, start rifling through them. You say, "All right, roll me an investigation check," or you go and you start rolling on a table, or whatever you decide for the loot. And you say the loot, and they say, "All right, cool, I take it." And here's a very important thing to note: verbal initiative isn't a thing. Once the combat is over, unless you're like trying to make checks, which, by the way, when someone is standing in front of you looking at you, there's no stealth check to hide the great sword in your cloak. There isn't such a thing like that can exist. There's no, don't let this verbal initiative, just because a player is more excited or asks first, doesn't mean they get first dibs at the treasure.
Yeah, and as a player, don't do that.
Yeah, a lot of players do that, and it's a dick move. You're a dick at the table if you do that. There's like the whole, "Oh, but my character would do it" thing. And if everyone's on board with that level of role play, then maybe it can work. Assuming you let the party have loot. But if not everyone's on board, don't be that guy.
Yeah, it's just not fun.
And as a GM, don't let that happen. That's kind of your job, to keep things fun, because it goes from like, "Oh, our cool sweet loot," to, "Oh, one of the party members stole my loot and I can't kill him because he's in my party and I don't know that he took it." Yeah. And now suddenly your players go from really excited about this cool stuff that you gave them to hating each other. And that's how a lot of groups fall apart. We talk a lot about, when we're doing the class series, about how campaigns end by level 7. That's a big reason why.
Oh man, it's such a common new player thing to want to like hoard things away for themselves, because that's part of like the fun of D&D, is that's the kind of thing you can't do in other games, really. So once you're given this opportunity to kind of be bad, so to speak, a lot of players will do that in this way, and just keep an eye out that as a DM.
Yeah, it's about playing the game together as a group. It's a cooperative game. But moving along,
let's end
cooperative.
On a light note.
Awards.
On a light note, yeah. You can give players at the end of a quest, or for doing something, some kind of clue or some lead on whatever their backstory is. Maybe their backstory isn't goal-oriented. Maybe they just run into, learn some information about an old friend from their past and where to visit them. Or maybe if they're seeking revenge, they get a hint about where to seek out the individual that they want revenge upon. These can make something that was incidental, like an incidental encounter, make it all of a sudden feel like it's this really important thing for this particular character. And I find it pretty rare that a character's not excited to find a chance to engage with their backstory, especially if they've written one. And if your character has written a backstory, they want to be involved in it. They want to do whatever it is that is their own personal quest. So that's a great way to reward a player that, has done something like that. Similarly, you could also just have them find, important points and important kind of spots for your major overarching story. That progression through your story is another perfectly good way to reward players.
And you can do both at the same time. Let's say that your story involves this big bandit encampment, right? That's like the whole point you've been going at this whole time, is bandits are grouping and becoming like a big combined barbarian horde, right, out in the forest that will soon threaten the city. And your players just have not gotten the hint. They've been attacked by bandits every time they left the town. They've seen burned carts. They just do not get Like the bandits have tried to flee into the woods and they've just let them go. And you're just like, oh my God, guys, chase the bandits one time. Well, here's a great thing to do. You got your one player in the party who is a noble. So when you're describing the loot that they find after defeating the bandits, you describe a very, very fine silk handkerchief engraved in golden thread with the initials and symbol of your house. And suddenly, what? Wait, they're attacking my noble house? And they care about this now. And these are ways that now they have a motive to hunt down that one bandit who escaped because that motherfucker robbed my caravans. You know? Like, there's a swear jar.
That's money out of my pocket.
Exactly. And these are now it's personal, Bionic.
Perfect, Bionic. Perfect.
These are great ways of first finding that handkerchief. That's a reward because the DM cares about you, and players like when the DM cares about them and pays them attention and is saying, I am engaging with this thing that you created and I'm making it important in the world like you wanted it to be. They love that. Players love that. If you're a player and you don't love that, let me know, because you're an anomaly. And I'd like maybe we could like research you. I don't know. And yeah, it's also a great way to get your players going in the right direction for the story when you're trying to push the story, but you don't want to railroad too hard. That's a great, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's probably going to do it for us on what we're going to talk about, at least today. Like we said, there's a lot of stuff on here that we could cover at length and have them be their own episodes, but I think this is a pretty good overview on player rewards. Any last things you want to get in, Jeremy?
Yeah. One last thing real quick, and I know I'm just continuing to shove stuff out, but I'm going to make this one real fast. If you give players a magic item that's not very good, like, for example, the +1 club I mentioned earlier, maybe give it some other random, like, negligible effect. For example, in Roll20 Presents Tomb of Annihilation, which is a YouTube web series, the players found a +1 magic club. And to make it more interesting, Dungeon Master Adam Coble, who's great, by the way, decided that it was actually a magical ore. He had it have a cool pun engraved on, not a cool pun, but a dumb pun engraved on the side. And he made that ore give them 10% faster rowing speed on their canoe, which they obsessed with for like the next 3 episodes. They were so into how do we maximize the use of this extra row speed, which it didn't matter. Spoiler alert. But like it felt so much cooler than a +1 club. I already have a magic weapon. I'm never going to use this. To like, I use this all the time. And it was really cool. Stuff like that is really neat. Maybe
That's great.
Sorry,
I was just going to say that was a very good example.
Yeah, maybe the icy dagger they find drips water and you can, it just drips water infinitely. That's a cool little quirk you've now given the item. God, we could have an whole episode on quirks. We'll do that someday.
Man. But any item that you pull out of Bartholomew's Big Bag Bonanza, odds are it has a quirk like that. For those of you who play in Pete and Jeremy's D&D time.
Anyway, I think we need to cut it because otherwise we're gonna just
we are already over time. Thank you everyone for watching.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate every single one of you. We love you all very much. If you love D&D time, or even if you just kind of find it mildly entertaining,
if you're tepid about D&D time,
yeah, even if you aren't sure, you might dislike it, but you kind of like it, make sure to tell everyone you know about it, including your grandparents. Everyone needs to know about D&D time. Spreading the word is how we grow. So the more people you tell, the better it's going to be for us. And the better it's going to be for you because we'll make more cool content.
On the subject of more cool content, Sunday, we announcing that? We 100% on Sunday?
Yes, we are.
Sunday, we've talked about it quite a bit now, and it's finally time for DnDTime Brews, where we'll be homebrewing content for y'all to play in Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime, which we run on Friday. It's a series of 3 unrelated one-shots that we run with viewers like you. If you watch today's stream, you've earned points to play in Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime. Check it out. But DnDTime Brews, we're going to be making, maybe subclasses, maybe some races. We're not entirely sure what the exact details of it are going to be, and we're going to be sourcing wisdom from chat to figure out how we make them. It's going to be a lot of fun. Come check out DnDTime Brews this Sunday.
I think our format's going to be, we're going to come in with a rough, like a word, like a 2-word maybe idea, like, for example, Green Sun Cultist.
Yeah.
And then we're going to work from there, or Green Sun Pact, or Patron, or whatever. And then work from there. So
Cleric of the Cloud.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I might do, because I've been trying to do a little bit more casual streaming, on Saturday, I might jump on for an hour and a half or so and just kind of shoot the shit with folks. And maybe we can brainstorm some cool ideas for things to brew in the future.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think we'll actually do any like actual home brewing, but just coming up with different concepts people would like to see. So maybe someone really wants to play the Trash Hunter Ranger. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. That sounds cool.
To me now that I've just said it.
I'm into it. I got so many DnDTime classes that I personally want to play in games, and I don't think I'll ever get a chance to do.
But yeah, I think that's enough for now, right?
Next week, we don't know what we're going to be talking about on DnDTime Talks. We had received a few suggestions. One of them was how we run one-shots, which is something that we might do because me and Jeremy have a lot to say on that particular topic. But if you have any suggestions, that's like, if there's anything that we're an expert on, that's the one.
It's
like
1 hour one-shots.
Yeah, if you our TM one-shots. So if you have any ideas for stuff that you'd like us to talk about, like, let us know over the course of the week, because that's not firmed up, and we're always looking for new ideas for topics to go over.
And yeah, without further ado, I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Pete, and this is DnDTime Talks.
Bye.